Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. And today I have again a very special guest with me that I'm so thankful is here today. It's the Polish folk witch, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell you what your content is all about.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to talk about Polish folk magic and hopefully also Silesian folk magic as well, because I know we share this interest. But getting to the point of introducing myself, so my name is Joanna. I'm the Polish folk witch. I live in Poland. I practice Polish folk magic. You can find me on the internet under the name Polish folk witch. I don't know what else to say about myself other than that, because it just feels like everything that's known about me online kind of revolves around Polish folk magic anyway. So I guess this is going to be the topic of our conversation, right?
Yes. So with that, I'll just ask you the question that I ask everyone when I have them on the channel here. And that would be, what got you into your specific practice initially? How did you get started in Polish folk magic?
Sure. I think this is a fascinating question anyway, because everybody has a different background and a combination of factors that played into our development as practitioners, right? I feel like for me, since I was a tiny child, I had experiences with spirits. So growing up, I really needed something to make sense of it and kind of learn how to navigate those experiences. So that's how I got into magic and occultism around 14 or 15 years old. Initially, it was mostly the kind of stuff that we had available at the time. So it was like chaos magic and kind of ceremonial magic, high magic, that kind of stuff. And then over time, because in Poland, this stuff really wasn't like easily available. For example, I know that like fellow practitioners that I speak to who live in Western countries, most of those people kind of started with Wicca because that's what was available. I feel like here, this was not a thing back then. So I didn't even know about Wicca until like 10 years later when I first compared to when I first started practicing, right? So it's kind of different in that way. But anyway, over the years, in Poland in general, I feel like there was this raise in interest when it comes to like Slavic mythology and Slavic deities and our folklore and culture. So as that interest grew, I also began to, have access to better sources about our, mythology, the deities that were here back before Christianization, because we really knew nothing about that, like you don't learn about that at school growing up, nothing.
Mm.
So it was like a rediscovery almost of my roots, and that was in, I suppose, like my late teens slash early 20s up until like late 20s when this love for Slavic folklore and Slavic paganism, especially because it turned into mostly interest in Slavic paganism, then evolved finally into interest in Slavic and Polish folk magic. So that's, I guess, kind of the short version of how it went. And I think I've been practicing strictly like Slavic folk magic with some additions of traditional witchcraft as well. The past, I suppose, 5, 6 years, something like that. So yeah, that's how it went for me.
That's really interesting. I mean, all the people that I usually talk to all had their first experiences through Wicca or at least a Wiccan lens. And it's interesting to see that in other parts of Europe, this isn't very much the case. And I'm just imagining what would like the practice of so many people look like that I know now if they hadn't got started in Wicca in the first place.
I
Uh,
know, right? It's fascinating because
yeah.
you can see kind of everybody starting in the same place, but if you talk to people from like Eastern Europe or like from Asia, etc., I feel like Wicca was not a thing, so you can really glean some interesting differences there, I feel like. But I would be interested in seeing like a study, comparative study or something, to see the actual differences in that and how it shapes practitioners of magic. Maybe somebody would pick that up. I don't know.
Well, I study cultural anthropology, so I might make that as a thesis at some point in the future.
That would be
Because,
awesome.
yeah, that sounds really interesting. And since you have focused on Polish folk magic specifically for quite some time and are the person that I know that is most well versed in this type of magic. Would you say that there are some generalizations that you could make about Polish folk magic or even Slavic forms of folk magic as a whole?
Sure. I feel like the root of Slavic folk magic really is the same across Slavic peoples, even though there are really pronounced like local differences between locations or between countries, right? So you have Eastern Slavs, Western Slavs, and Southern Slavs. And each of those groups has kind of their own flavor of folk magic. But I feel like the root of it is the same. And of course, with folk magic, it's rooted in animism. That's something that you just can't skip. Animism is always present in folk magic. I feel like that's even universal outside of Slavs, right? But
Yeah,
maybe I'm wrong. But I feel like that's the case. So animism is the root of it, and then based on that, all of the kind of earth-focused or seasonal focused traditions, folklore, beliefs, etc., come into play, and those also are quite similar across the Slavs. But also when it comes to like, let's skip the lore and stuff and get to the practical shit. When you look at the practice of folk magic, I feel like Slavic folk magic in particular works on those principles of moisture and dryness, which is really interesting. And I feel like that stems from animism and the kind of looking at natural cycles and how moisture and dryness influences how everything grows around you, whether you have life or not. So moisture in Slavic folk magic is kind of the equivalent of life force energy. So you often say in traditional Slavic or Polish folk spells, for example, that if you want to harm somebody or even kill somebody through magic, you want to dry them up. That means like ususzyć. That means to dry somebody up literally.
uh-huh.
That means to steal the moisture or take away the moisture from them. And that's kind of how they are depleted of their life force energy and unable to continue living. And on the other side, when you want to heal somebody, if somebody's sick, and we have a variety of like folk illnesses that are really interesting, but maybe I'm not going to get into that right now. Still, if you want to heal somebody, you want to apply moisture to them, back to their body. So, for example, oftentimes in traditional Slavic folk medicine, you would have those practices of various baths or bathing in rivers, in specific like sacred springs, etc. But also collecting dew in the morning from grass or from plants, literally, to apply that moisture back into the body. And dew, especially, so the droplets of water that collect on plants
Yeah.
during the night. When you collect them and when you either rub them into your body or try to drink them, they are believed to be the most potent for healing and for also like restoring beauty, etc. So I would say that those principles of moisture and dryness would probably be universal when it comes to actual like applied practical rules of Slavic folk magic.
That's amazing. I've never heard about this dry wet system. That seems to be very like Slavic specific, but I do know that in German folk magic, we also have a lot of magic that centers around dew, for example. And maybe you have that in Polish folk magic too, that at special dates, usually around the solstice, you're supposed to go over the grass that is covered in dew, and that would like bring some sort of healing or protection to you.
Yeah, same, especially when it comes to beauty. Like it's known that around summer solstice, you are supposed to go out very early in the morning to collect dew and like wash your face in it, etc., to stay and remain youthful and beautiful, etc. So yeah, definitely there is some kind of shared root here, I feel like.
So you talked a bit about that there are very drastic differences that can exist between each region in Poland when it comes to folk magic, even though they all have some similarities. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about these specific differences and if you could maybe give some examples of that.
Yeah, sure. I feel like those are mostly cultural in nature, as you would expect, because nature across Poland and like the climate across Poland is fairly the same everywhere. So there's no differences stemming from those land-based things, you know. But culture plays a huge role as well. So, for example, and I know that you know because you are interested in the Silesian region, especially that
Yeah.
Silesians are people who have a very distinct culture. They have their own language and their own kind of, like combination of beliefs. And the same happens in other regions in Poland where you have people like the Carpathians or Kashubians up in the north. Um, and quite a few other, like for example, also in the east of Poland, you have people's folk magic being mostly influenced by the Orthodox religion, whereas in the like central and western Poland, it's a mixture of Catholicism with like pagan beliefs, etc. So those I feel like apply those differences to the practice of folk magic mostly because at its base, when you look at the animistic roots of folk magic, I feel like it's universal, as I was mentioning, but those cultural differences make a difference, right? I feel
Yeah.
like I'm kind of going in circles here. But for example, if we were to look at practical applications again, in specific regions, you have names of spirits that reside there and nowhere else. For example, here in the lower Silesian region where I live, you have the spirit of the mountain who's called 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔀 or in German, that would be Rübezahl. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, so and in other regions, for example, in Świętokrzyskie, where my family has its roots, you have those witches believed to, like spiritual witches, not actual physical witches, if that makes sense, believed to live uh, at the top of the Bald Mountain. So that's a place where you would travel to the Sabbat, and you even have like a specific song that you are supposed to recite to get there. So those would be the kind of local things that make no sense elsewhere, to practice them elsewhere, because they have no application. Like there's no point to call to the spirit of the mountain in like northern Poland, hundreds of kilometers away, because that spirit is not there. So that's where those differences stem from, right? In various parts of the country as well, you would have different cults of saints and like different, for example, sacred springs or other sacred features of nature where there's a cult of that place, and based on it you have legends and there are names of spirits that just don't apply elsewhere. So I would say that's kind of the main differences that you would find.
That's also, I've just come to this with my perspective, and I see the similarities that exist between this and how folk magic functions in Germany. For example, you have the Kashubians in the north who have their own language and culture, and in northern Germany we have like not really a unified name for them, but I guess you could call them like the Saxons, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also the group that I'm a part of. And we also have our own language and culture and stuff. And that like feels very familiar when you talk about these differences, especially also with the saints that are very regional. Here, my village has a very like big cult around Saint Anne, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and a few villages over there is another saint, for example. So it feels like all very familiar to me the way you describe it.
I know, and I feel like in general, it's often talked about when it comes to practice of magic and witchcraft and folk magic, right? That we tend to, as humans, I guess, we have this tendency to try and compartmentalize everything and like put it into neat boxes where this is German folk magic, this is Polish folk magic, and they don't intersect. But the truth is that we have so many similarities, and the fact that, folk magic, it stems from the people. The people, doesn't matter if they are in Poland, in Germany, or elsewhere in the world, have the same base needs. we have, and especially our ancestors, they needed for their crops to grow, they needed for their children to be healthy and not die at an early stage of life. They needed to protect their property from fire and from wild animals, etc. So those base needs were the same everywhere. And that's also influenced how folk magic developed over the years, right? Because based on those needs, we developed our methods of working this magic. So when you look at it in this way, why would it be so different? We are
Yeah,
the same species.
yeah. I also, when I research my forms of folk magic, I always come across sources from other countries and uh, countries that you wouldn't expect my folk magic to be related to. I find sources from Italian folk magic that sound very similar. And yeah, I guess many people, especially when they don't come from these cultures initially and have this sort of outsider perspective, they like to very compartmentalize everything and have everything in its neat little box. And the reality is just that everything kind of blends together. I've had a similar conversation in the interview that I did with the Dutch folk magic practitioner, your local Aruna, and she said the same thing, that folk magic in the Netherlands has some similarities with folk magic from Germany and stuff. So I guess Europe is just a very big melting pot in general.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like maybe this might be surprising to some people, maybe not, I don't know. But actually, traditional witchcraft, when you look at it across Europe and you look at the base lore, it's the same. It's literally the same. And that's just because, like, the witch hunts, for example, happened in most countries in Europe, and those who were hunting witches were using the same kind of rules for recognizing who a witch is, etc. So those beliefs also kind of spread across Europe and influenced the practitioners of folk magic who came after that period. And I feel like when you look at the base components of witches flying to the Sabbath, right? Witches
Yeah,
having orgies with the devil, or
yeah,
like other types of lore that may seem sick to the like normie, I suppose, like an average person in the society. All of that seeped into the practice of folk witchcraft as well. And the regional differences really stem from the land, the climate, the how the terrain is sculpted as well as some other like local features, right? But the rest at the base, I feel like has the same source or the same root.
yeah. And speaking of local features, since you're also very animist in your practice, from what I could gather, what would you say are the impacts of the land where you live from an animist perspective on your practice?
Honestly, it's everything. I feel like my practice would be really empty if it was devoid of the living connection to the land and striving to be a part of the ecosystem around me. So it's everything, really. It's like for some people of different religions, the church that they go to, they wouldn't be able to practice without it. The nature around me, I wouldn't be able to practice without it. Without this connection, you have no connection to spirits. And without the connection to spirits, how do you really practice? I mean, there are various focuses that you can devote yourself to in your practice. But for me, spirit work is really crucial when it comes to how I tap into those powers and life force energies that I work with. And I feel like magic is not just about me, and it's not just for me. So I need to be, in agreement and working together and collaborating with the local spirits in order for the benefit, I suppose, of the whole region and not just myself and my, lowly human goals of having enough money to buy bread and like pay taxes and and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
it's crucial to me. So where I live in Sobutka, which back when it was in Germany, it was called Zopten.
yeah, something
And
like that.
yeah, I believe so. this place, we have this mountain 𝔨𝔨𝔫 here, as well as a slightly smaller, mountain 𝔖𝔬𝔢𝔨 next to it. And those were places of worship for actually thousands of years, since the Neolithic age, at least it's confirmed. So you have remains of cultures, of Slavic culture, of Celtic culture, and other tribes and different groups of people that lived on this land over those thousands of years, right? There were so many changes when it comes to the human component of it, right? But the local component of the land, the spirit of this mountain, and the spirits that live around here, it remains unchanged, I feel like. So, for example, there's this local legend here that back in the day, days of old, there were only two smaller mountains, Radunia and Koznica, and 𝔨𝔨𝔫 was not there. And actually, in the place where you have 𝔨𝔨𝔫 right now, there was a doorway to hell. And through that doorway, devils would be able to go out into the world and observe what people are doing and influence the world, right? But eventually, when they were on Radunia, kind of observing everything around, they noticed a host of angels on Koznica, which nowadays is called the Angel Mountain as well. And they started fighting and throwing rocks at each other for such a long time that they built a mountain that's 𝔨𝔨𝔫 now. But unfortunately, they didn't kind of take into consideration that by throwing those stones, they would be blocking the gateway back to hell. So those devils are believed to still be roaming around here because they can't go back. So, I feel like that's more important than the human-centric lens applied to the land, because it changes so much. And over the years, over the past 1,000 years, this place was under Polish kind of rulership, then Czech rulership, then Prussian, German, and then back to Poland, right? Yeah. So it kind of feels obsolete. Of course, if we look at the sociological component of it and the pains and aches of the people that lived here and were displaced, etc., that's serious stuff. But that does not necessarily play the central role when it comes to the animistic lens of looking at working with the land, right? Our anthropocentric problems fade into the background. And when you work through the animist lens, you've really learned to focus on the spirits that have been here way before humans even arrived, right? So it kind of changes the perspective and makes you perceive those human problems, some of them at least, as kind of maybe not the most important to fight about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I would summarize it.
Since you already talked about the many changes that Silesia went through culture-wise, I'm wondering, since a lot of the population in Silesia got expelled, and then new people were forced to settle there, how did so much folklore, for example, about the mountains that you talked about, survive if the original people that talked about these stories were pushed away and new people were pushed in?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I'm not sure how it survived, because I'm also somebody who came here. My family does not come from here for many generations, right? So I could also be seen as an outsider in some sense. But so I'm not sure how it survived, but I know that there's legends that local folk kind of talk about how, despite the displacement of the people who lived here, up to the end of the Second World War, some of them stayed behind and kind of guarded some of the things that remained here, etc. So there's this kind of secret lore around everything, and legends of guardians of the place being here for many, many generations. So I believe that maybe if there's some grain of truth to these beliefs and legends, then maybe there are people here who actually have been keeping some kind of record of those of this lore that was here for a long time. I don't know, it's just my guess, and I'm just as kind of interested as you, or maybe even more. I don't know, it's hard to judge in the lore of this place, because it's so mysterious, and it's so hard to get a grasp on, and it's so hard to find sources. And I'm sure that you kind of struggle with it too, trying to
Yeah.
find this kind of lore. Like, some of it is in Polish, some of it is in German, so some of it is in Silesian, but a lot of it really is just word of mouth. It was never recorded, so you will learn something from the locals who heard something from somebody who heard it from somebody else, and it just kind of travels like that. So it feels like this, sometimes it's going to be a weird, I guess, metaphor, but sometimes being here almost feels like you are starting a new RPG game, and you are thrown into a land where you know nothing about it, and you need to get to know all the NPCs, and gather all the quests, and learn the land features, and where the spirits reside, and places of power where you can gather some skills, right? Etc. So it's kind of funny, but it's kind of like that. Sometimes it feels like that, trying to uncover all of this stuff, because it's not readily available. And sometimes when I find a book or something, I'm over the moon. I'm like, wow, I don't believe I never found this or stumbled upon this before. So I feel like I will be learning the lore of this land, and the traditions and everything, until I die, probably, because it's just not easy, honestly.
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, but now I finally have the words to explain that to people what it is like.
Yeah.
And so, what I'm also interested in is how this very tumultuous history of Silesia um, plays a part in your life specifically, how that may be reflected in
Hmm.
what you do.
Hmm. Being very interested in the land, this is a huge interest of mine, kind of a hobby, I suppose you could say, to learn as much as I can. But maybe some background, because I feel like it's interesting, and maybe not something that people who listen to this or watch this later would be familiar with, how it works here, I guess. So basically, my family comes from Świętokrzyskie region, which is another region in Poland, and my parents moved to Opolskie, which is, you have like Upper Silesia, you have Opolskie, which is in the middle, and then you have Lower Silesia. All of those three regions are Silesia as a whole.
Mm.
So I was born in Opolskie, so in the kind of middle Silesia region. And since the beginning of my life here, I was treated by Silesians as an outsider because of my background. So I was never truly like part of the people here. And so, for example, I can understand Silesian language, but I'm not kind of allowed to speak it, if that makes sense, for out of respect for the people. So of course I'm not a dick, so I am kind of going by the rules that are here. And so growing up here was interesting, because I was also experiencing this culture, especially the culture, kind of treated as an outsider and not being allowed inside on some things. So I feel like for somebody with my background, the immersion in the culture is probably different than for somebody who has roots here, or for somebody who like comes from Germany and has Silesian roots. That's probably even better, honestly, because you would be like immediately accepted as their own people, I guess. Whereas for
W-
me, some things are just unattainable in that regard. Yeah, that's how it
Would
works.
I?
Yeah,
That's
I think so.
that's kind of surprising to me because I always have like the feeling that if I were to go to Silesia now as a German, I always thought that the people living there nowadays wouldn't be like very welcoming to me because like, oh God, the Germans are coming back and something like that. So
No.
you saying that I would like be accepted there is very like surprising to me.
Yeah,
And
that's what I wanted to say, all the background, because I guess it maybe does not intuitively make sense that it's this way, but it's really like that, especially in the upper Silesian regions and Opolskie, because in Dolnośląskie, so the lower Silesia where I am right now, it's
Yeah.
a different story altogether as well. I don't know if you want to hear about that or
Uh,
not, because
of course, I want to hear about it.
sure. So the thing is that in Opolskie and in the Upper Silesia, uh, most of the people that live there are actually Silesians. So most of them have like double citizenship, both Polish and German. Most of them speak Silesian, German, and Polish, and they have family in Germany as well. And they are very much invested in their kind of German side of identity and culture, I would say. So if you go there as a German person with Silesian background, you would be the most welcome, and you would probably find a common language with them really soon because they speak German as well, etc. Whereas in here in Lower Silesia, it's kind of a different story, because once the German people after the World War II were displaced from here and forcefully removed from here, which is very unfortunate, of course. There was like this huge melting pot of peoples that were moved here. So I actually prepared a list so that you get a picture of how complex it is. So you have Silesians, you have Germans, you have Poles. And when it comes to the Polish people, you have Polish people who were moved here from Lithuania, Ukraine, France, even Siberia. And all of them brought like different influences from where they were moved here. Then you also have Ukrainians, Jews, the Romani people, Bosniaks, Carpathians, Lemkos, Armenians, Karaites, Tatars, Bulgarians, and even Greeks. This is the Lower Silesia. And
Yeah.
so when you look at it this way, like almost everybody feels maybe not like an outsider here, but everybody feels welcome, but in a different sense. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just such a huge mix. And I was really trying hard to like compile this list of people. And the best way to do this was actually by studying the cuisine that's in Lower Silesia and nowhere else. Because, you know, when people are displaced, when they travel from somewhere or emigrate from somewhere, you can easily recognize that because they bring their cuisine from back where they came from, right? So
Mm.
I was compiling this list based on the kind of cuisine that you can find here in Lower Silesia. So yeah, it is a different mix than in the other regions of Silesia, I suppose. And also with that come like cultural differences. For example, here you will not find people speaking Silesian, unlike in the other two regions. Here, most people speak Polish or also a lot of Ukrainian, because when the war started in Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainians came here because they also had a lot of family already here back from the displacement after World War II. For example, my fiance's father also was with his family displaced from Ukraine and moved here. So just an example, right? It's really complex. It's really complicated. And I feel like we could be here talking about this for a week and not even get at some of the aspects of how it is to be here, I guess.
That's so interesting. As someone who's just studying Silesia from afar, basically, I've never realized the actual cultural diversity that's in Lower Silesia right now, because my family is from Lower Silesia, so that's the region that I'm most interested in. They're from like the mountainous region around 𝔇𝔢, I think it's called nowadays.
Yeah, Kłodzko. Hmm.
Yeah. And
That's a beautiful region, by the way.
that's good to know. It looks pretty in pictures, but I of course don't really know what it's like there today. I
Are
really
you
want to.
planning to get here and like travel around and see all of the
I
places?
would love to one day, but right now I don't really have the ability to, and I'm always kind of like anxious because 𝔇𝔢 is very like country and very like smaller villages, and I don't know if the people living there would necessarily speak English, so I wouldn't have a
Probably
language.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't have a language to communicate with them in, and that might lead to some very awkward situations.
Yeah,
But
probably.
um, but I'm hoping that at least one day I'll be able to like go to the village that my family lived in and maybe see some of the old buildings if they still stand and like the place that they lived in was like very covered in pine trees all around, and that always has this magical feel. And I love to experience that because where I live now in northwestern Germany, we don't
Mm-hmm.
really have these thick pine needle forests. We have more like a lot of beech trees and oak trees and birches and everything, but nothing really that compares to that. So
Mm-hmm.
it would be amazing to like just feel the land, basically, to get a sense for the land spirits there because I'm so unfamiliar with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be awesome to like if you ever get the chance to go there, like basically hear your thoughts and how it felt and everything. That would be really curious to kind of hear about. And honestly, there is a huge chance that some of the buildings would be the same. When you look around in the, especially in the like villages around here in Dolnośląskie, so Lower Silesia, we call those buildings po-niemieckie, which means
Mm.
like buildings that stayed after Germans. I guess that's how you would translate it. And a lot of them still like are standing, and many people still live in them. Some of them are in a bad shape, honestly, but a lot of them were like restored, etc. So there's a like fair chance that they could still be there actually. So I'm sure that would be very special for you to be able to experience that.
Yeah, that honestly, when we talk about this, the urge to go to Quartzco gets increasingly stronger. But I'll I'll see that hopefully within the next few years I get the chance to visit and experience that for the first time, and
Yeah.
maybe send some pictures back to my grandma because she was a child when the Silesian expulsion happened, so she doesn't remember anything.
Hmm.
And uh, it would be interesting to like show my family to be like, hey, this is where we used to live. And
Yeah, that would probably be awesome for her as well to be able to see that.
what I also find very interesting is that in the Quartzco region in the southwest, I believe, there was like region that was inhabited by Czech people that spoke a Czech Silesian dialect, and a few kilometers further east, my family lived that spoke a German Silesian dialect. So that always also shows just how diverse Silesia and Lower Silesia has always kind of been.
Yeah, for
Because
sure. Yeah, for sure. Because it's this place that's changed, the borders changed a lot, right? It feels like, and it was always on the borders of those three countries. It almost makes me think sometimes, if you had to compare, like it makes me think about Switzerland, where you have those regions, or also like Slovenia as well, where those are such small countries that they have those regions or on each side of the country that speaks their own combination based on who they are bordering with. So
yeah,
Silesia almost feels like similar in that way too.
yeah, I I originally thought about maybe learning a bit Polish so that when I visited the area, I could at least talk to some people that don't speak English. But then I figured out that Polish is like one of the five hardest languages to learn, and I was like, no, maybe, maybe don't do that.
Yeah. Honestly, it would probably take a long time. So it's not like I don't want to discourage you, but you'd probably, it would be easier to learn Silesian than Polish.
Yeah, I figured as much. Um, Also, what I'm wondering is how you, as someone that lives within all of this cultural diversity, how do you go about researching folklore and folk practices from Lower Silesia when you keep in mind that there is just so much intermixing of culture that happened there, and you can't necessarily just look at one source? How do you go about acquiring so many pieces of information, and how do you piece them together to something that you could use in your practice?
So it's definitely a work in progress for me. As I said, I will probably never be done. But how I'm trying to research is mostly to look for like legends and folklore of very specific regions. So like legends of the mountain 𝔬𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨, for example, or legends of the like Izere mountains, which are a bit lower down south. And that's how you find the good stuff, I feel like. So being very specific, because if you try to look for books about like the folklore and legends of the Lower Silesia as a whole region, you will only find like very vague stuff because of the complex mixture of cultures and everything. It's funny because a lot of Polish people who live in other regions of Poland actually kind of perceive this Lower Silesian region as cultureless in the sense how sometimes people say that America is cultureless, right? I'm doing this because I think it's bullshit, honestly.
Yeah.
But some people say that because if they see such a complex mixture of peoples, then they kind of assume that there's nothing here because there's too much to form something that makes sense, I guess. But if you are actually here, that's not the case. The place is steeped in culture, but also in this mixture. So you need to be specific, looking up for, as I said, legends and myths and stories of very specific, like towns, mountains, and other like natural features that are known for something, I suppose. That's how you would find the good stuff. And I managed to find some gems, I guess. For example, I will just show you one book. This will say nothing to you, so I will just translate. But this is basically a book written by Przemysław Wiater, who is a guy who's really into this stuff. Like he's deep into the lore, you know. And this is a book about the old herb craft and herbal healing of Karkonosze and Izere. So these are like two mountain ranges in Lower Silesia. And this is about laboranci, which is kind of like a group of people who could be seen as alchemists or like mages, but also kind of herbalists. You get the kind of theme, right? Who come to the spirit mountain, the Rübetal or 𝔬𝔤𝔨𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔨, and they learn this lore from him directly. And in here, in this book, you actually have like actual recipes of those people collected from some manuscripts and translated from German and from Silesian, etc. So this is such a gem. And I only found this recently. And I feel like, you know, it's you just can't predict what you're going to find and if you're going to find anything. So I feel like maybe this is not the most helpful if somebody were to listen to this and based on this try to find you know good sources for to research this region in particular. But I feel like in general, because I also other than studying Lower Silesia, I'm also into, you know, Polish and Slavic folklore and folk magic and all of that. So I feel like it's the most important to look for books about folklore, about traditions, and basically myths and legends of specific regions, places, etc. I feel like that gives you the most kind of authentic access to the beliefs of people and what they actually practiced. Because if you try to look for books dedicated to like specific type of folk magic, you will probably find nothing in Poland, at least. What you have to look instead for are the beliefs and practices of common folk, because along in those stories about their traditions and what they did and how they tended to the land, etc., that's where the folk magic is actually hidden. So you need to read that, then you need to extract those folk magic parts and you need to apply them into your practice. It's a bit of work, honestly, but I think it's worth it. So that's how I would, I guess, summarize. I don't know how helpful this is for people to actually apply to their research, but that's how it goes for me, at least. It's kind of messy.
Yeah, when people ask me the same question about German folk magic, I basically give the same advice that you just gave. And to anyone who's listening and wants to learn more about Polish folk magic, you can just subscribe to the Polish Folk Witches Patreon. I bet there's a lot of information on there. And also, what you just talked about with the herbal healers and the connection to Rübezahl and stuff. I've come across sources that talk about Lower Silesian healing magic that use a special type of healing clay that I also found really interesting. I wondered if you heard about that.
No, I haven't. I
Okay,
want to know more.
I'll send you the document and then you
I
can
would love
look it
that.
up. Uh,
Thank you.
I feel like Lower Silesia specifically has so much history when it comes to herbal healing, because I also heard about those healers in German. I think they were called like Wurzelmann or something like that, which
Hmm.
means like root man, because I guess they were working with roots a lot. And I feel like this is also one of the more like regional differences, you could maybe say, with Lower Silesia and the rest of Poland or even Germany.
That's really interesting. And see, some of this about the clay, for example, I never stumbled upon this before. So I wonder if there are any sources available in Polish. So if I could ever find it, basically, I feel like, for this region, especially, it would be awesome if just people, both Germans and Polish people, like contributed to this study of the region and helped each other
Yeah,
to, like cross translate, etc. Because it's definitely not a job for one person, that's for sure. Unless you know all the languages, then maybe. But
yeah,
yeah, I know
exactly.
some people who also live here who are, witches and enthusiasts of the lore, etc., who stumble upon some like old sources about some of the legends here, etc., and trying to translate from like old German and kind of like mixed in with some dialects and stuff that it's even hard to translate through Google Translate. Like, good luck to them. But
Yeah,
I was talking to some of those people and they just can't, they hit the wall, and there's a place where they just can't go further with their research. It's impossible to do on your own. So yeah, it would be really awesome if somehow we could, create, I don't know, this research group or whatever. That sounds not very realistic, but I guess that's the dream, to really be able to, get to the good stuff.
yeah. I also, whenever I talk about Silesia, especially on TikTok, I always get like weird comments from both Germans and Polish people that just cannot get along and just constantly argue about if Silesia is truly German or truly Polish or truly whatever. And I'm just like, can we not do this, please? Like,
Yeah,
I'm
can you
tired.
stop?
Yeah, Silesia has been through enough. Let's just keep it quiet. And honestly, the multiculturalism of Silesia is basically, I think, what makes Silesia Silesian in a way. I feel like
Yeah.
that's so embedded in the culture that just taking that away and saying Silesia is just one single thing is really doing a disservice.
Yeah, I know some people seem to be very kind of territorial in that way,
Yeah,
that they like to say, this is my land, this is mine, whereas land belongs to none of us, honestly. As I was saying earlier, like, it doesn't matter how many groups and tribes of people, even before countries were a thing, like traveled through here. Like, for example, on 𝔖𝔬𝔢, on the top of the mountain, we have this 2,000 years old sculpture of a bear. And
mhm,
this is kind of the regional mascot, you could say, or like the main symbol of this place. And it was made by Celts.
yeah,
So based on that, like, is this supposed to be a Celtic region now? You know what I mean? It just makes no sense. There were so many people here over the centuries. This land belongs to nobody. It doesn't matter which border currently happens to just be here. Like, what? No. If you
yeah,
were to look at it this way, like, there have been like some Slavic tribes in the lands that are currently within Eastern Germany. So
yeah,
am I supposed to like go invade because my ancestors were there? Like, no, why?
yeah,
Makes no sense. We really don't need to be owning everything. It's so human centric to be just saying that you have the right to a piece of land. No, we are here for a really brief moment, then we die. And like, the land carries our bones and our ashes gracefully, and that's all that matters. And I just feel like it comes from some kind of blindness to the greater realities of what the world is made of when people do this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm really sorry actually that you have to be dealing with those kinds of comments. I never really stumbled upon anything like that, but maybe that's because I'm not really out there as much as you are with talking about Silesia and the magic of this region and everything. So Yeah, I'm just really sorry that you have to be dealing with this type of people, honestly.
Yeah, well, I guess when you talk about this topic, you, at least the way I do, you can't really avoid it. But I've learned to deal with it. Usually, these aren't also people that follow me. They're just like come in, see my video, leave some hate comments, and then leave again. Which, okay, fine by me. I can just delete the comment, block you, and we'll never have to interact with each other again. And yeah, I knew what I was getting into when I started talking about Silesia.
Hmm.
And something that I also find funny is that just the thought that since Silesia had Celtic parts, that now suddenly the Irish or the Welsh come in and say like, "This is our land." This would be very funny.
Yeah,
And
I know.
speaking of many different people groups and stuff that have connections to Silesia or to Poland, what are your experiences or thoughts on the Polish diaspora? Like people with Silesian or Polish ancestry that live further away, maybe US, because that's a lot of where my viewers are from. And what are your thoughts on them and how you would maybe suggest to them to reconnect back to Polish culture? Are there some tips that you could maybe give?
Hmm. So I think like the answer to this is going to be at least twofold for me. So I suppose you just can't get easy answers from me
Mm.
today. But you know, I work with a lot of people, like a lot of my subscribers on Patreon, for example, are people from America who have Slavic roots and really wanted to reconnect with their ancestry and the folk magic of the Slavs, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about this a lot amongst each other. It's like a topic of interest because I feel like there's a lot of wounding around this subject, stemming from the fact that there are many people here in Poland, or I believe like you get assholes everywhere, right? That would say that if you don't live here, then you don't have the right to practice like rodnoveries or Slavic paganism, or like you don't have the right to incorporate aspects of our, I guess, legacy, they would call it, or our customs and all of that, because you're not here, because you have no access to the land, etc. And I feel like that's just being an asshole and a gatekeeper, honestly. But also I think there are some aspects, like there's a tiny bit of truth to it, in the sense that, as I was saying earlier, with the local spirits, for example, there's no point to work with a spirit that is in a specific region if you are far away from there, because it's just not possible. At least that's how it works in the way I perceive working in an animistic lens and working with folk magic. Somebody could disagree, and I don't mind. I feel like this is open for everybody's experience. So I feel like there are limits to what you can do when it comes to the kind of magics that are tied to the land specifically. But there's also this ancestral aspect of it, this, I guess, blood connection aspect of it. And that's something that nobody can take away from you, no matter where you are in the world. If somebody happens to be to have Polish roots or Slavic roots and be living in America, or I don't know, elsewhere in the world, I don't really care where. Who am I to tell them what they are allowed to practice and how they are allowed to connect to their ancestral roots? It's not for me to decide. It's not for me to judge. I just don't have the right to do that. And I believe that people who are very like into creating discord and drama around those subjects are people who need to learn to mind their own business, basically. So where, as I said, where I believe there are limits to what you can do, there's a lot that you can do, and nobody can dictate how it works for you. And when it comes to specifically like Slavic folk magic, etc., many people whom I work with, who I know, who want to connect with those roots, I feel like they are even like overly trying to be overly respectful and tiptoeing around everybody, not to offend everybody. And as a result of that, they are afraid to practice what they are called to be practicing, or they are afraid to connect with their ancestors on a deeper level, because they are afraid of getting canceled or of getting criticism about what they can and cannot do. And I think it's very unfortunate. And that's why with the people I work with, I always reassure them that this is okay to do. You're allowed to do this. It's for you. And your ancestors, they are like, cheering you on in the background, and they want the best for you. They love you and they want you to connect with your roots. So if you have access to something that's authentic, that comes from this culture, that comes from this ancestral background, like, go for it. They're going to be delighted to see you practicing those things. So yeah, I always encourage people, and I truly believe that what I'm saying is true. But also, there is this darker side to it, I suppose, where you have people who do this strictly to earn money for monetization purposes. So you will always get people like that with everything. People who, for me, what I have a problem with, I guess, is people who write books about Slavic folk magic or Slavic witchcraft. I'm not going to be saying any names because there's no point. Just basically people who claim some kind of background which can be easily questioned when you dig around, who write books about this heritage and everything, where their information is clearly incorrect. And I've had experiences with some authors who tried to use me to verify information for them. And then when I tried to help them, they would actually strike back on me or get angry when I pointed out, like, look, this is not actually correct. This is not how our ancestors did this, or according to the sources in my language, this is how this and that worked. So some people just can't really accept that, maybe their sources are incorrect and they just want to basically monetize on it. And that's something that I have low tolerance for. And I just think it's really problematic, where you have somebody who's not really respecting the culture and their own thing is more important for them than being true to some of those traditions. But other than that, like, any witch like you and me, like, go for it. It's for you. You're supposed to be doing that. So yeah, I guess that's how I would summarize it. And also one thing, because you were asking about diasporas and I kind of omitted the most important part, I guess, is that I am seeing this and I think it's beautiful that people who live in diasporas in other countries, they have this, it's almost like, it's very similar to how it works in Silesia, that you have this base of the ancestral practice, but on top of it, there's also this addition that's local and stemming from the land where you live right now, which is not here, right? It's in America or somewhere else. And that's normal and that's beautiful and that's authentic. So a American Polish folk witches practice would be a bit different than mine because we live in different places. And I feel like both are authentic. So I think it's wiser for them not to try and kind of role play being a Polish witch if they don't live here, but instead be authentic to the culture of the diaspora that evolved where they live, because that's the authentic folk magic and folk culture of this person's people, right? So yeah, that's
exactly.
about it.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I just have the German folk magic perspective, but I also just try to tell German Americans when they research this practice that maybe looking into Germany should not be the first thing that they do and more look into their specific German diaspora. And it's interesting that you've come to the same conclusion with your form of folk magic. Again, I find these similarities very interesting. And
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree.
and now we are basically at the end of the outline that I have. And lastly, I just wanted to ask you if there are some like pieces of folklore or some small spells in Polish folk magic that you might be able to share on here.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a huge nerd, of course, of the folklore of my people. It's something I love and I'm really passionate about it. Honestly, this is gonna sound nerdy as shit, but oftentimes when I research the lore of my people, I cry because it just touches me so much how wise they were and how deep this stuff is. And I'm just so grateful to be able to have access to it. So yeah, I just often honestly cry out of joy when I research it. And I'm a huge nerd of all of it. But getting back to the topic of some interesting pieces of folklore and folk magic, an example that I could give, I just recently released like an in-depth article about the folk magic and folklore of elder tree. So I would like to give an example from that. So in Polish folklore and Slavic in general, it was believed that elder trees actually, each one of them possesses a spirit that lives in the roots of the tree. And this spirit sometimes is kind of perceived as a local devil or this kind of dark figure who seems kind of scary, but also is very, very, very helpful and beneficial to the people. So the Slavic people would literally revere the elder tree and often talk to it or about it as a holy tree because of that. And because of that, also there's a lot of taboos around the tree. So what you can and cannot do with and around the tree if you want to stay on good terms. So, for example, you can't damage the tree in any way. You can't try and dig up the roots. You can't try and cut the tree down. You can't try and burn the tree or use pieces of the tree like flowers or berries or branches, etc., without permission. Or else if you do that, you actually can catch a multitude of illnesses. And the thing is that the Slavic people and the Polish people among them, right, believed that you can go to the elder tree uh, and ask and petition the tree to take away illnesses from you. And so I can quote, I actually have a source here just so that it doesn't seem like it's pulled out of nowhere, of a really short zamawianie. Zamawianie is like a type of spoken spell that you say as a witch or as a practitioner of folk magic to plants, to animals, to like features of nature, to spirits, etc., to communicate with them directly, right? And this is a zamawianie that's meant to ask for the tree to take away an illness from you. And this is how it goes. I'm first going to read it in Polish, and then I'm going to try and roughly translate. Święty Bzie, weź moje bolenie pod swoje zdrowe korzenie. And this translates to Holy Elder. Please take my pains under your healthy roots. That's how it goes, roughly. And this is basically what you would do. You could go to the tree to ask for your child to be healed. You could also take illnesses, like remove them from somebody's body through specific practices, and then actually bury them under the tree, which is really interesting, right? And then petition the tree for the tree to take those illnesses, or even like if you had an unwanted pregnancy, this was like a type of very early folk abortion method where you would go to the tree and say to the tree, how did it go, the formula? It was really interesting. You would like throw a flower at the tree and you would say, please carry this for me and I will bloom for you. You know, this kind of type of sympathetic magic where you exchange, forces. So exchange a pregnancy for blooming, I guess, which is really interesting. So that's a piece of lore that's still kind of prevalent to this day. There's still a lot of taboos around the elder tree. Most people still, if you have a garden, you definitely have an elder tree growing there. Most people still gather the flowers and the berries of the tree for medicinal purposes. myself included, of course. I gather the flowers for teas, and I make syrups from the berries. When you get sick in the darker half of the year, you would use that to boost your immune system. So that's just one example, and maybe quite a short example I can give. I was mentioning from the Świętokrzyskie region, where my family has like older roots there. If you want to travel to the Sabbat and you are a Slavic folk witch, you can say this very, very short kind of saying or song and just repeat it in a trance-like manner to achieve spirit flight and be able to fly to the Sabbat. And it goes like this. Płot nie płot, las nie las, wieś nie wieś, biesie nieś. And you would just repeat this for a longer period of time. And a rough translation of this one would be that a fence is not a fence, a forest is not a forest, a village is not a village, devil carry me. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, so those would be some examples of how you can do some stuff magically in accordance with Polish folk magic.
That's so interesting. When you talked about the elder tree, I remember that in Germany we have the same exact taboos around cutting down the elder tree, and we have
Really?
we have a saying that goes like, "Willst du aus dem Leben scheiden, musst du den Holunder schneiden," and that translates to, "If you want to die, you should cut down the elder tree."
Oh, wow. I love that.
And it's also connected to Frau Holle, which is like a great well, she's a lot in folklore, but basically she is a goddess in German folk magic, in German folklore. Like she controls the weather and the seasons and the animals, and also has some weird associations with life and death and such. And this is
Mm-hmm.
like the tree that's most associated with her. So to hear that you have the same like reverence for this elder tree in such similar ways over in Poland, again, is so interesting to me. And just what we talked about previously just shows that everything
Yeah.
kind of intermeshes.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Thank you so much for mentioning that and the connection with Frau Holle as well. It's interesting because in some sources that I stumbled upon from around the regions here, it's actually common in like old chronicles to be performing this syncretism where the chronicle who was writing about, for example, Slavic deities, they would be often syncretizing Frau Holle with Marzanna, who is a goddess of life and death in amongst the Slavs. So they would kind of, instead of using the Polish name for the goddess, they would say Frau Holle or use like a similar iteration of the name of Frau Holle, basically. So it's interesting because I feel like there's some deeper, interconnections that are going on with this. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a topic for another probably 2 hour long conversation, right?
Yes. But again, it's so interesting to see how all of this is like so connected, and my mind just keeps racing and making connections. And
Same.
yeah, but Uh, I guess we've been recording for over an hour at this point, so I guess I'll just start closing it out here and
Sure.
say thank you so much for doing this interview with me. It has been a blast, and I've learned so much. And I hope that the people watching this also have learned very much from you. And if there's anything that you might want to promote, anything that you want to let the people know, basically, now is your opportunity to do so.
Sure. Thank you so much. I just want to say, similarly to you, that I learned a lot and I'm so glad for and happy for this opportunity to be able to spread, the information about the lore and everything. I'm just so passionate about it and I want everybody to have access to it. So having this opportunity and being able, especially to cross connect, I guess, when it comes to the Silesian lore as well, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so, so much. When it comes to promoting stuff, I'm not really big on that. You can just, if you're watching this and if you liked what I was talking about, you can find me on social media and on Patreon under Polish Folk Witch. That's it. Thank you.
All right. So, and thank you everyone who is watching this, and I'll hope I'll see you in the next video. And Lodi wat goed,